unlock this podcast with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of heroes and horrors, of capes and corpses, of laughter and lamentation. It is the middle ground between the comic and the cosmic, between the origin story and the obituary. A realm where every panel hides a pulse. You're moving into a land of both shadow and ink, of splash pages and screams. You've just crossed over into the Superfan zone. Tonight, dear listeners, we venture into a world where gods fall, legends rot, and hope itself fights a losing battle against the inevitable. A world where Superman's heart breaks, Batman's plans crumble, and Wonder Woman's lasso can't bind the end of days. But fear not, dear listener, for I'm not walking this dark road alone. Joining us is a man well versed in journeys to the fifth dimension, an explorer of eerie echoes and midnight morals, the host of the Twilight Zone Podcast, Mr. Tom Elliott, a man who stared into the black and white abyss and lived to tell the tale, now stepping into the four-coloured apocalypse of DCeased. Together, with my partner in podcasting, the ever-brilliant Rob O'Connor, we'll peel back the pages of DCeased, its storylines, its symbolism, and its surprising heart. We'll ask, what happens when humanity's greatest champions face an enemy they can't punch, outthink, or save? So dim the lights, set your dial to disbelief, and brace yourself, because in this episode of All-Star Superfan Podcast, we're not just talking about the end of the world, we're living it, one panel at a time. Tom, this has been long overdue. Welcome to All-Star Superfan Podcast.
Alan, Rob, it's great to be here. I'm such a fan of the show. It's one of my first day listens. You know, whenever one pops up, I listen to it that day. So I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to fanboy out here a little bit. I've been very excited when we've had certain other podcast hosts on the show. Zach Moore, Matt Truax, loads of people. I'd want to, Michael Bailey, loads of people. But I have to say I'm genuinely giddy with excitement because removed from the Superman world, I am a massive, massive fan of the Twilight Zone podcast. I discovered it about 5 or 6 years ago, introduced by the great Zach Moore. I was listening to Zach, did Franchise Fatigue at the time, and his co-host presented Alfred Hitchcock Presents podcast. And I asked Zach, is there anything for the Twilight Zone? I can never find anything for the Twilight Zone. And he said, Alan, I have just the podcast for you. And I listened on one of my many walks, and I just absolutely fell in love with everything about it. The style, the way you present it, it's just absolutely superb, top notch. Absolutely love it.
Wow, isn't that crazy the way all that fell together? You know, that you met Zach and you just asked him that question. That's very Twilight Zone in and of itself, I think. But thank you. It's been a labour of love. It's taken a lot longer than I thought it would. But it's my baby, the Twilight Zone podcast. And thank you, man. I appreciate those kind words.
How long have you been doing it now, Tom?
Man, I think we're getting on for like 15 years. But my original intention, based on the number of episodes, would be like, this is going to take me 3 years. But as I started doing it, it evolved, and the way I did the episodes evolved, and it is not the show that it once was when I started it, because it's just such a I don't know, it's such a detailed kind of difficult edit and so on. So each one takes a long time to put together. So that 3 years ballooned quite quickly into a lot long, and I'm not even finished yet. So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, I will talk in a few minutes about how I kind of came to discover the Twilight Zone initially. Rob, where are you with the Twilight Zone? I know you're not I don't think you're as familiar with it as obviously, well, definitely not Tom, but probably not myself. But where do you stand with it? Have you ever seen the original series?
To be honest, I'm mainly familiar with the Twilight Zone through cultural osmosis. I'm familiar with the theme tune. I'm familiar with all I'm familiar with it through spoofs of it. So I have seen the Terror at 40,000 feet. Is that what it's called? The William Shatner one? Nice connection.
20,000, isn't it?
Nightmare at 20,000.
20,000
Nightmare at
feet,
20,000. So I have seen that one in full, and I've probably seen bits and pieces, and I'm obviously familiar with the iconic announcer whose name escapes me right now.
Rod Serling.
I was also going to make a very dark joke about a helicopter sequence has a very different connotation when you're talking about the Twilight Zone compared to Superman, but maybe I won't make that joke. And the last thing I'll say is and we were talking about this recently, Alan. When I went to Disney World as a kid, one of my favorite rides was Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Orlando, and the whole production design of it, and the actors that were kind of like the tour guides as you walk in, and then you walk in and it's this haunted elevator that's going up and down really fast, and it was incredible. It left such an impression on me at the time. But I'm kind of I'm fairly ignorant to the Twilight Zone, and it is something I would like to change, because I've seen some lovely clips of it. There was a clip going around recently of Hitler talking to Dennis Hopper, which I was captivated by, and it was like it was really, really well shot and well acted, and I was going, man, I need to get into more of this. So I commend your efforts, Tom, and I will be listening when I take on that journey for sure.
Thank you.
It's so funny you mentioned the Tower of Terror. I was on the one in Paris not 2 weeks ago and took some photos and videos. I know I sent it to you, Rob, and to Zach, and to you, Tom, and it's as good as I remember. But when it comes to you, Tom, what do you love about the Twilight Zone? What is it that captivated you originally that made you such an amazing or a huge fan?
It's funny, really, because I'm not really a student of that era of television. You know, I can't really talk in depth about anything else that came out around that time. But there's something about the Twilight Zone that is so unique and so magical, and I think just transcends the time that it was made. And I think a big part of that is Rod Serling. You know, he is just such a unique figure, I think, you know, and I'm not going to get political on your show or anything like that, but I think irrespective of anyone's politics, you listen to Rod Serling actually talk, and there's a wisdom there that I think we could all really use these days that is hard to disagree with. And I think when you start to know the man and you see that come through the show, it all just kind of fits together, you know?
And how old were you when you first kind of discovered originally? Were you a kid like I was, or? Yeah,
I was a kid. It was shown on, like, I don't even remember the channel. It might have been Channel 4 or something like that. But they used to show, like, interesting stuff in the night, like Godzilla movies or, you know, the Twilight Zone of a Friday night. So I would stay up and watch it. So I was probably half asleep, which is a good way to experience the Twilight Zone, you know.
To enter the fifth dimension, yeah.
Yeah, this semi-dream-like state. So that's when I discovered it. I must have been like 12, 13, something like that, I think. So, but it stuck with me. And then years later, I just, I saw the DVD box sets coming out, and I thought, hold on a minute. You know, it just sort of scratched a little memory for me. And those things sat on my shelf for a while, and then I thought, oh, you know what? If I podcast about them, then I will watch them, you know? And then all of a sudden, this happened, you know?
It's insane. I always remember my first time ever seeing it, because like you, like I love noir films now and films of that era now, but as a kid I had no interest in anything that came before the, you know, late 70s at the very latest. But I remember being on a holiday in Strasbourg with some friends of my parents who were visiting them and visiting their parents there. And I remember staying up late one night, and like that, it was just on every single night at a certain time. And one of the nights, and I still remember it. And I don't even know, you know, in the tapestry of Twilight Zone, if it's a great episode or not, but it was The Hunt. It was the one where the guy dies and they won't let his dog into heaven. And then he's like, well, if I can't come into heaven, you know, fuck you. I'll walk into the abyss forever with my best friend. And then he walks on down the road, and there's another gate with another guy. And he's like, well, welcome to heaven. And he's like, well, I thought that place was heaven. And they're like, oh, no, that was the test. If you had walked in there, you would have spent your eternity in eternal damnation. And I remember for like 3 days, just that thought just stuck in my brain like a seed that had been planted, and I forgot about it for years and years and years until, like Rob mentioned, referenced there earlier on, I came on the Twilight Zone movie, saw that, and then ended up going back and watching kind of old episodes on YouTube, and eventually got the DVDs. And it's just such a timeless classic. I think it's just absolutely superb. Why do you think that, like, all of the different versions that have come over the years, we had a version in the 80s, which I was fond of that as well to a certain extent, not to the same level. And obviously we had the awful 2000s show, and we had a reboot then again a few years ago. Why do you think they can never properly repeat the magic of the Twilight Zone?
You know, I've liked various episodes of all those iterations, you know, because a good writer is a good writer and a good story is a good story, but it's probably the Rod Serling factor, you know. He was such a presence in that show, and I've said this many times, he sort of exists in and out of the fiction of the show. You know, we know he's the writer of the show, but he's also inside the show saying, blah, 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 the Twilight Zone at the beginning of it. So he sort of sits between both of these worlds, and he's such an enigmatic figure. Is he a god? Is he a guide? Is he a judge? You just don't know. The show doesn't tell you. So it's got this great undiscovered aspect to it that I absolutely love. And I actually think Jordan Peele sort of did it quite well in his version, but Rod Serling is Rod Serling. You know, it's just hard to replace that presence, I think.
Do you mind me asking, Tom, is there an equivalent show? Because there are similar shows nowadays, like you have Black Mirror and things like that. Is there an equivalent show or an equivalent piece of media that kind of occupies the same space for you?
I would say you just mentioned it. The only show that I would say has been as smart as The Twilight Zone, as clever as The Twilight Zone, even though, you know, a lot of people compare it. They do have their differences. But I think it's the only show really that's quite as switched on and as clever as The Twilight Zone was, yeah.
I have a specific kind of type of episode of the original series that I really love, and they're those real character-driven episodes. And, you know, they're some of the most popular. I'm not a huge fan of the Nightmares at 20,000 Feet. I much actually prefer Nick of Time, that William Shatner episode. And things like Eye of the Beholder. They're great, but they're so ingrained, like Rob said, like through cultural osmosis, through The Simpsons and everything else. Everybody just knows. I never experienced any of those twists for the first time. But I find...
Was there a Father Ted spoof of that episode as well, or am I misremembering that?
There was definitely an episode where they're all stuck in a plane. I don't know, and they had to climb out onto the wheel, but I don't know if there was a gremlin or that involved.
Our American listeners aren't going to know what Father Ted is. Google it. It's the best. It is technically a British sitcom. It was made by British production.
We're claiming it.
We are claiming it. It's about Irish priests on a remote island, and it's the funniest sitcom ever made, and there's only 23 episodes. The greatest thing ever. Sorry, Alan.
No, you're fine. But the episodes that I really love, and they're still quite popular, are things like A Stop at Willoughby or Walking Distance, where a man, basically his car breaks down and he walks to the next town, and it turns out it's his hometown from 30 years previously, and he meets himself as a kid, and his father, he kind of has this meeting with his father where his father doesn't really believe him, and basically tells him that it's time to go back to his own time. His time as a child has passed, and all that kind of stuff really hits deep. Do you have, whereas I'm not a huge fan of, say, the comedy centric episodes as such, because there are quite some dingers there. Do you have a specific kind of episode that ticks all your boxes, Tom? Is there a specific kind of a formula for an episode that you like? What's your kind of favorite genre of Twilight Zone episode?
You probably nailed it there, because Rod Serling just had a really... He could latch onto the parts of the human experience that we all kind of go through. And especially, you know, he was a young man when he wrote the show, but he had a kind of canny eye for what we all go through in life. And one of the things that he touched upon a lot in things like Walking Distance was that we're all young at one point, we're ambitious, we're go-getters, but then we sort of get a bit older and, you know, we just want to settle down, but the world is still a fast world. And because you're not that person anymore, the person you used to be is now biting at your coattails, you know, kind of thing. And he had a real keen eye for that. And that is the theme of several episodes. And when Rod Serling does his thing, I really like it. So those ones are great. But there's also the ones where, there's this thing about the Twilight Zone being about, cultural issues and things that he couldn't speak about. So he, masked it within science fiction and so on. But sometimes within the Twilight Zone, he's just like, nah, I'm going to take the gloves off, man. And, that's when you get Dennis Hopper speaking to Hitler and things like that. He's like, right, I'm just going to go for it. And I love that too, when Rod Serling takes the gloves off and really tells us, the truth of things.
And if, say, there was listeners to our show now who've never experienced it, and and that's I absolutely accept that it's what is it now? Nearly a 70-year-old show at this point. Is there any specific episode, if you were to recommend one for someone to check out after listening to this, that you would recommend that they check out? Do you have one that's kind of a go-to for people who've never seen the show?
I would say, and this is not a cop-out, that the first season of that show is almost perfect. Virtually every episode, apart from maybe one or two, is just absolute top-notch Twilight Zone. And that's not to say it got worse from there, but for a show to hit the ground running the way the Twilight Zone did is like pretty unbelievable. So I would say you could probably put a pin in an episode in the first season, and you'll get to a great one. But Walking Distance is great. That's the more whimsical Twilight Zone. The first episode, Where Is Everybody? It's not the greatest Twilight Zone episode, but it's kind of a good introduction to the show. It kind of eases you in.
It catches you. It catches your attention, and you need to solve that mystery with the character. It's you and him together. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah,
and I had the great honor to speak to Earl Holliman, who was in that first episode of the Twilight Zone, which just blew my mind. So yeah, just pick something out of season one, and as long as it's not one of the comedy episodes, you'll probably do okay.
And it doesn't take a huge amount of investment if you want to check one out. I mean, most episodes, like except for season 4, where they experimented with an hour-long format almost, they're pretty much done in 22 to 30 minutes.
That's it, 23 minutes. And you're done, so you can easily go through a few and see what works for you.
Tom, first of all, I'm sold. By the way, I'm going to do that, and I'm looking forward to it. The listeners won't know this, but when you said the name Earl Holliman, my brain just clicked. I was like, where do I know that name from? And I just looked him up. And apologies for, I feel like neither of you are going to know what I'm talking about. Earl Holliman played the dad in Nightman the series.
Wow, did he?
Maybe the worst superhero TV show from the 90s that I absolutely love. I own the complete series on DVD, and I briefly flirted with the idea of a rewatch podcast. Look it up if you've never heard about it. Nightman, not to be confused with the song from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Nothing to do with that. It's a comic book from the 90s created by Steve Englehart, and it's basically just a rip-off of Batman, and they did a TV show, and it's terrible, but I love it. He's a jazz saxophone player by night, and he's a superhero also by night, and his dad is in it, and yeah, he was played by Earl Holliman, so there you go.
That definitely sounds like a Patreon adventure, Rob, to be honest.
Yeah, the very advanced tiers of the Patreon, I'd say. That's where the Nightman rewatch podcast will live.
Tom, one thing I love about the Twilight Zone podcast is it has this real kind of like nighttime. You know those old radio shows where you're driving late at night and you just have the kind of adultery tones of a radio host, and he's telling a story or he's interviewing somebody, and it really feels like that. Almost like it always reminds me of, I can't think of the actress's name now, but in The Fog, when she does the radio show from the lighthouse. Really it kind of feels like that. And there's a lot of times when I'd be driving at night, if I was at work and that I'd be listening to your show, and I just, there's something about listening to a Twilight Zone podcast late at night as well. I just think it's fantastic. How do you approach, say, researching your episodes or preparing for an episode of your show? Does it take very long to do that? Because they're very well, you can tell a lot of work goes into them.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is if anyone does try the podcast off the back of this, it has been going 15 years now, and when I started out, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just like, I want to talk about the Twilight Zone.
I wonder what that's like.
So I thought I was going for a particular thing, and you're right. I love that kind of thing of you're awake at 2:00 in the morning, and it's as if it's just you and the DJ who are awake in the world, and that's what I always wanted it to be. I don't think I really made it that way in the beginning, but as time went on, I learned how to do it. I learned how to speak on the mic and stuff like that, and it became the show that I always wanted it to be. And you're absolutely right. You know, the Adrian Barbeau in The Fog.
Adrian Barbeau, yes.
That was absolutely an influence.
Oh, was that a direct influence on the? I just pulled that out of the air. Was that a direct influence on the? On
absolutely.
The way? Oh my God! Wow, brilliant.
Absolutely, but also kind of trying to be inside and outside of the fiction as well, like Rod Serling is in the Twilight Zone. You know.
Yeah.
I won't bore the listeners with certain things that I do to try and perpetuate that, but it's a case of, you know, I have a stack of books there that each episode I will go through, get some facts, and then try and make it a kind of collage of clips, trivia about the episodes, bit of personal opinion, and just keep all that in the mix and keep that going. So I'm not focusing on one thing too much at a time, and hopefully it comes out that way. But you're absolutely right. It's something that I always love the thought of someone being awake at 2:00 in the morning and listening to it.
I'm going to hazard a guess that you're a David Lynch fan, Tom.
I'm currently rewatching Twin Peaks as we speak. Yeah,
amazing. The listeners won't see it. I have my copy of the Twilight Zone Companion here, which is one of the many books or guidebooks that you reference regularly, and it's an absolutely fascinating read. And yourself and Zach went last year, I think. You went to the Sterling Fest over in, is it upstate New York or New Jersey? It's in Binghamton, isn't it?
That's right, Binghamton, New York. We've been to two now, Zach and I. And wow. It's quite a small thing. I think the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, who are connected to Rod's family and stuff, put it together. So it's quite nice and intimate. So it's been a great time the couple of times that I've went. Yeah.
Everybody, we're coming into that time of the year, that seasonal time of the year with witches and ghosts. And my daughter actually got a kitten there a few days ago, and we've named her Pumpkin. So that just goes to show the seasonal effect that it's having on the Burke household. But we decided as well to do a little bit of a Halloween special, and Rob came up with the idea of checking out DCeased, which is a 6-issue comic book miniseries published by DC Comics from May to October of 2019. It was created by writer Tom Taylor and the artistic team, including artist Trevor Hairsine, I want to say. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hairsine, I'm going to go with. And inker Stefano Gadiano. I'm butchering that name, sorry folks. The story takes place in an alternate Earth where a corrupted version of the anti-life equation has infected most of Earth's inhabitants with a zombie-like virus. Lois Lane acts as the series narrator, detailing how the events took place over the course of a few weeks. Now, before we get into the book itself proper, this is DC meets zombies, and I'm just wondering, Rob, zombie movies. We spoke about 2 years ago when we did our Brightburn episode about our kind of individual love for horrors and the style of horrors we love and the genres the subgenres we love and all that kind of stuff. Where do you stand on zombie movies?
Yeah, I like zombie movies. Yeah, sure. I really like the Romero classics. A bit of a basic take. I really like Night of the Living Dead. I really like the remake of Night of the Living Dead as well. The remake actually was kind of a formative DVD rental when I was a teenager. I remember I was like maybe 12 or 13, and me and my friends really wanted to rent a scary movie, and my dad was like, I feel like this will be okay. He's like, it's going to just be, gore and stuff like that. But I feel like they'll handle this. And he was right. And Tony Todd is in that one. He's really, really good. In later years, then I discovered Dawn of the Dead, the original Dawn of the Dead. And I quite liked that one. I think I wouldn't say it was one of my favorites, but then many years later, again, I discovered Day of the Dead, which I've mentioned on a bunch of podcasts. I absolutely love that one. I would say that's probably my favorite of the trilogy, actually. But I really want to talk about that. There's a film. I'm not going to bore people with the details, but basically the rights to the original Night of the Living Dead got kind of swept up, and George Romero didn't keep them, and that's why it's not called Dawn of the Living Dead. It's called Dawn of the Dead. But the word Living Dead, a different crowd of people retained the rights to that, and they made a film called Return of the Living Dead, which is more of a horror comedy, and I love that film. I think it's absolutely excellent, and it's kind of it's a little bit different from your traditional zombie movie in that it's not just you chop their head off and they die. These zombies, it's like you chop their head off and then their body becomes like a disembodied, or their head becomes a disembodied head that can crawl after you, and like you can chop up every part of their body and it'll still, they're basically unstoppable zombies. But it's so funny and it's got such a great cast, and they made a bunch of sequels to that one as well. Love those. The games, the Dead Rising games, they're basically just games of Night of the Living Dead. They're great. So yeah, a lot of love for zombies and zombie stuff. Don't really love it as much as, say, like the vampire genre or other kind of horror genres, but yeah, no, I'm down for some zombies.
And what about you, Tom?
You know what? I think Rob just kind of nailed the answer to that question right there, because I've been very lucky in the past. I used to write for a magazine called Scream Magazine, and I was a big fan of the Tom Savini remake of Night of the Living Dead, and I got to speak to Tony Todd in that magazine. I interviewed like the whole cast of Return of the Living Dead virtually, and I've got those recordings still. I love Return of the Living Dead. Day of the Dead is a very special movie to me because before I even touched the Twilight Zone, I did a horror podcast.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got the chance to speak with Joe Pilato, who plays Captain Rhodes in Day of the Dead, and I'm just this guy who's like, oh my God, I'm going to interview someone, But he made that interview great. It wasn't me. He made it great because he was such a great guy. Rest his soul. So I love those movies as well. I think Day of the Dead, Tom Savini's effects are just the best zombie movie effects of any zombie movie. But then you got things like Shaun of the Dead, which is a big homage to, all that stuff, which is just great. So yeah, I'm very much down with the classics as well, I think.
But I forgot to mention as well, big Superman connections in some of those movies. I've mentioned it on like a ton of episodes. Sherman Howard in Day of the Dead is like incredible. It's the best performance of his career probably as Bud the zombie. But then also in Return of the Living Dead, James Caan is like one of the big characters in that, and he's excellent in that. And he has such a great death scene in that movie if anyone hasn't seen it. So definitely check it out for that. That's a fun Superman connection.
And what do you say, Rob, look for in I'm not a zombie enthusiast by any means. I kind of discovered the zombie genre with Shaun of the Dead back when that came out, circa 2004, whenever that was, 2003. And then I went back and watched some of the older movies eventually. And then obviously there was, video games of, things like The Last of Us kind of got me back into it a little bit as well. And then we moved on into, when I read some of the Walking Dead books, and then obviously the TV series. I followed that for the first season or two. Were you going to say something, Rob?
Yeah, you've just reminded me of two things. First of all, yeah, I've never seen the Walking Dead TV show, but I did read the first 50 odd issues of the comic.
You've never seen it?
That was great. I've never seen it because I read the comic. I was like, I feel like I've it's the same with Invincible now. It's like I feel like I've done this already. I don't need to anyway. But the other thing you've reminded me of is the original novel World War Z. I actually think, I know you're not a big novel guy, Alan. I think you would love that because it reads like a non-fiction book.
Okay.
And it's like all these testimonials of people who survived the zombie apocalypse, and it just deals with kind of all the political ramifications of what would happen in a zombie invasion, how the various governments, especially the American government, try to deal with it, and they deal with it really badly. And it's like, it's eerily prescient of how they would eventually deal with the pandemic, the COVID-19 thing of it all. Like, and their initial approach is, oh well, we can just be really showy with our big tanks and like try and blow up a load of stuff, and people will just assume that we have it all under control, and they don't. And there's all these really heartbreaking stories of like communities rallying together initially, but then gradually they just start breaking apart as they become more and more desperate. And all of that, when you ask the question what makes a great zombie story, to me it's like characters becoming more and more desperate and their survival instincts kicking in, and people's leadership kind of qualities coming to the fore, but also people's egos coming to the fore, and how that can make a situation worse, and all that. All that is just so interesting. Actually hacking up body parts and all that's all just fun. That's just kind of gravy, you know. And Shaun of the Dead, by the way, is great for that. Like that genuinely is a great character driven movie, you know. So yeah,
there's something. It's very strange. There's something about zombie movies that I almost don't like, because they're almost more real than vampire movies in some ways to me. Like some of them, especially the ones that kind of came out in the 2000s, and that they're, like this kind of thing could happen. And then obviously we had the pandemic and stuff, and that was on everybody's minds about things, But is there like again, for someone who isn't well versed in it, is there like kind of a golden age, say, of zombie movies? Is it back in the 80s or the 70s? Or is it kind of always evolving?
I mean, it all comes back to Romero, I would imagine. So we're probably talking like 70s, 80s. There was a massive resurgence. I'm sure you both remember this, when Zack Snyder made the Dawn of the Dead remake, and then it was just wall-to-wall zombie movies. It did get a little bit tiresome, I must admit, and I love a zombie movie. But, there was some good stuff in there. But I would say, yeah, for me, because I love 70s movie making anyway, there's just a sort of grittiness to it that I will always go back to. So for me, it's going to be the 70s and 80s.
Tom, do you remember Simon Pegg's quote about the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead?
No, go on.
So obviously Zack Snyder popularized this idea that zombies can be fast and they will actually run after you instead of kind of just hobbling after you slowly like they usually do. And Simon Pegg had this quote. Someone asked him, oh, well, how come the zombies in Shaun of the Dead aren't like that? How come they're the classic sort of George Romero style? And he said, death is not an energy drink. Which I thought was very funny.
Absolutely.
When, Tom, did you say, when it comes to, we'll just talk about DCeased a little bit. When did you first kind of become aware of that series? Did you read it during its original run back in 2019, or how did it come to your attention?
Literally when you said, Tom, will you come on the podcast? Because the thing is, I'm a lapsed comic book reader from 1989, when I saw Batman, and Batmania gripped England, and I'm sure it gripped Ireland as well. Then I was a comic book buyer for probably 2 decades, but then life moves on and your interests move on. But I've always had a fondness for it. But DC recently have been bringing out these compact editions. Have you seen them? They're like £7 or £8, and it's this curated collection of graphic novels, and some of them I know very well, like The Long Halloween and stuff, and some of them I don't, like DCeased. So however you say it.
I know it's tough to say something. Yeah.
So it was part of that collection, so I did have it. So the moment you mentioned it, it was like, great, that's a perfect opportunity to read it,
I think they're really targeting the kind of manga crowd with those, which is absolutely what they should be doing, because they're like the same size as kind of manga books and stuff like that, and they tend to be kind of close to that section in the bookshop, I've noticed. So it's really savvy what they're doing. I appreciate those volumes very much.
Being an enthusiast of, say, the Romero stuff, Rob, and stuff from the 70s and 80s and onwards, when DC announced this, was it something that you were immediately interested in, or was it something that you were like, look, it is what it is?
The second one. Because to be honest, there's a series called Marvel Zombies that was very, very popular before this, and I think this is DC just going, oh yeah, we'll do that as well. No, I like that Tom Taylor is a writer that I quite like, and he I believe he wrote Son of Kal-El, if I'm not mistaken, which we did an episode on back in the day, and he also wrote the the Injustice tie-in comic, which was kind of like strangely quite good and lasted like a lot longer than I think people expected it to, because it was just a tie-in for a video game, but it ended up taking on a life of its own. So he's kind of well suited to something like this, where it's kind of like, ooh, what if this crazy thing happened in the DC universe? So yeah, no, I listen to the Weekly Planet podcast every week, and they were kind of surprised by how much they enjoyed this, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. And yeah, it's a bit of fun. It's a good, fun, quick Halloween read. I wouldn't put it anywhere near the heights of the Batman Dracula trilogy, but I think it's well worth checking out, this one. Yeah.
And did you read it back in 2019 as it was coming out, or did you catch it later on?
No, I read this in the last few days in preparation for this episode.
Oh, right. Okay, we're all in the same boat.
We're all in the same boat, I think.
Yeah. I actually thought that it was a lot older, because I remember my first kind of it coming to my attention was when I was in like comic book stores, like here in Dublin. We have Big Bang and Sub City, and you'd see like the statuettes, you know, you'd see like a cool zombie Batman and all, because that's what they were kind of pushing. And I was like, oh, you know, what's that? And then I saw some of the covers and I was like, oh yeah, okay, it's DC Zombies, I get it. I never felt the need to read it, but then when you suggested it, Rob, for a Halloween episode this year, like you said, Tom, it was the perfect opportunity to jump back in. And we're not going to go through it specifically panel by panel or issue by issue. We're just going to kind of have a general talk about it overall, and what we thought on our read through. We've all read it kind of for the first time in the last few days. I have to say, I totally agree with the guys from the Weekly Planet podcast. I sat down for my first reading of it here the other day, thinking I'll read an issue or two over a few days or whatever. And I sat down in this room with a cup of coffee, and I just flew through it. I really enjoyed it for what it is thin. I think when it comes to story and characterizations and stuff, it's a kind of a tick the box thing, but still done well. It could have been awful, and I thought a lot of it was well written. I thought there was a lot of nice moments in it. How does it stack up? Tom, do you think, compared to kind of some of the other zombie stuff that's been out over the last few decades? Say, is it kind of up there with it? Do you think they did a good job? Do you think they could have done anything better?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I love zombie movies. I love comic books. I love superheroes. I've just never necessarily felt the need to mix them. You know what I mean? It's not like
separation of church and state.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, I wish they'd do this, but that, they've done it. I think what I find really interesting about it, that maybe other Elseworlds type stuff doesn't do, is like, your average Elseworlds is, what if Batman was a knight? What if Batman was in Victorian England, or whatever. This is basically, and I'd stopped reading comics by this point, but from what I gather, it was basically a snapshot of the DC universe at that time, but they just take this crazy left turn. And I think that was a pretty cool way of doing it, rather than just a completely, imagined kind of universe. So, I think these universe-wide events are such a mixed bag, and it can just end up being like, you kind of zoom through them and it's like, oh, now these guys are together, now these guys are together, now these guys are together, and I'm a sucker for it as much as anyone. I read 0 Hour and all that kind of stuff back in the day. For me, it's about looking for the smaller moments in it, and I think there are a lot of smaller moments in this that kind of made me smile. Stuff like Batman putting on the Mr. Freeze suit to try and survive, you know what I mean? Yeah. Things like that, just little things that make you go, oh man, that's pretty cool, And I think that's what it had in spades, really.
One thing I thought was quite original, and Rob, you might explain this a little bit, or you might kind of have a little bit more background to it. The anti-life equation. So the whole premise of the book, right, is that, see, he's getting ready to go. The whole premise of the book is that Darkseid invades the Earth. There's this huge battle that we don't see with the Justice League, and we're kind of coming at that last moment. It's almost like a Superman the Animated Series moment, where he tells Darkseid to leave and never come back. And, you know, you think Darkseid is defeated. As he's walking off, he turns around, he's like, that's fine, I've got what I came here for. And I think it's the Flash makes, or it might be Oliver Queen, I think it's the Flash, who turns around and makes a comment about how that was scarily ominous, you know, before he walks off. And it turns out that what he was looking for was Cyborg. He's discovered that the second half of the anti-life equation is within Cyborg, and he has kidnapped Cyborg. He brings him back to Apocalypse, and DCeased is torturing him. They cut out his tongue to access the anti-life equation. And this is where I couldn't really quite get my head around it, Rob. I thought you might be able to help out a little bit. So DCeased warns that that half of the equation will be lost forever, basically, if Cyborg dies. So they infuse him with like the Black Racer or the Death Racer or something to keep him alive, but he's dead himself, so it kind of corrupts the anti-life equation. This is very complicated. My question is, what the fuck is the anti-life equation? Because that's something I'm not too familiar with myself.
So the anti-life equation, I was afraid you were going to ask me this, by the way, because I don't know is my honest answer. Right?
It only took 4 years.
The anti-life equation is the thing that Darkseid wants. In all the stories I've read that involve Darkseid, he always seems to want it. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the case in the Snyderverse as well. He's trying to get the anti-life equation. It's definitely the case in the DC animated universe. It's just the thing that he wants. I don't fully understand what it is.
Okay.
It's a thing that he wants. And it was definitely going back as far as like Final Crisis and all that stuff. Tom, you look like you know what it is. Do you care to?
Then I must be putting on a good face because I have no idea. I mean, the kind of, I'll be honest, the kind of Darkseid sort of area of the DC universe has never been my favorite thing. You know, I'm more of a grounded, you know, Batman kicking the crap out of someone in an alleyway is my thing. That said, and you know, I'm not sure how well this will go down on this show. I do love the Zack Snyder stuff, to be honest.
This is a safe place, Tom. This is a safe place. You're amongst friends. You're allowed.
So that was, but even in that, I didn't really know what the anti-life equation was. so yeah, I have no idea. I can't help you on that one, Alan.
All respect to Jack Kirby, by the way, and I fully intend to. By the way, I've never actually read Jack Kirby's Fourth World, and it probably makes more sense there than it ever has since. So, you know, but yeah, to answer your question, I do not know what the anti-life equation is.
So the virus spreads, and there's a question to this. The virus spreads then when Cyborg, when the equation is corrupted, Darkseid is infected. Basically, he destroys all of Apocalypse, and Cyborg goes back to the Earth, and the virus then is spread both biologically and digitally through like social media, you know, phone screens, tablet screens, and it just absolutely, you know, infests the Earth. There's, I think, something like a figure thrown out like 600 million infected within a few hours or something like that. Do you guys think, say, as in terms of a zombie apocalypse virus, do you think that is a good way to come about it, and it wasn't just some kind of lab created thing, that they actually tried to make a little bit of effort in terms of bringing, say, Darkseid into an apocalypse and kind of putting a little bit of effort into how this thing came along and how it spread?
Yeah, I thought it was all right, you know, using Cyborg in that way. I thought it was pretty decent. You know, I do wonder, maybe it's the Twilight Zone fan in me, whether there is some social commentary about social media just basically ruining the world, you know, because that is generally what I kind of believe. You know, I've made some great friendships on it, but you only have to go on Twitter and just see what a battleground it is. So I do wonder whether that's part of it, but whether it is or it isn't, I thought it was a pretty decent way of putting it out there, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really cool idea that like the zombie virus can spread that way, and the only people who are immune are the people that stay away from that whole side of the world, of which there still are some, you know? I wonder, that does it really work in a superhero world, you know, that kind of way? It's something that's so removed from reality, having this like realistic way for the virus to spread. It just doesn't really have the same impact. But I you know, and there is precedence for techno-organic viruses. That's something I feel is more of a Marvel thing in general. But I did think that was a cool idea, that, you know, if you're looking at a screen in any way, that, you know, you can be subjected to this. And then also the idea that Superman is able to make himself immune to it by just turning his X-ray vision on all the time, which is kind of a fun Superman power idea that I like that.
Yeah,
I like that cool. Myself. Yeah, I thought that was quite smart. Towards the end of the first issue, we get our first big casualties in terms of, say, the Bat family, and we get Dick Grayson and Tim Drake infected, and Batman takes them on and stuff. How do you think that was? I really enjoyed that segment where he realizes how it's been transmitted, and he basically unleashes like an EMP, like an electronic shutdown of Wayne Manor, but it's already too late. How do you think? Did you like how that was approached? Because you kind of have to take Batman out of it fairly quickly, I think. Otherwise, he'll just come up with an answer. As Batman deaths go, how do you think this was? How do you think this rated?
I think it was a pretty brave move because, you know, he's a fan favorite, and to take him out the game so quickly, especially when you take Batman out of his own comic and you put him in the sort of grander scheme of things, that version of Batman always has the answers, doesn't he? Like, one of my favorite runs of comics is Grant Morrison's JLA run. And
oh, yes.
You're hitting all the right buttons, Tom.
And, you know, Batman in that, he's always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And, you know, I do love that part of it, because you've got to sort of power him up in some way in relation to everyone else, and that's his thing. Taking him out of the game quite quickly, I think, was a brave thing to do, and I kind of get it. But it also gave them chance to have quite some dramatic moments with Damian and, you know, young Jonathan and so on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I have to say, one person, a member of the Bat family, who is totally badass, I think, in this one, and needs a shout out, is Alfred. Like he's the one, like you mentioned earlier on, Tom. Batman puts on the Mr. Freeze suit to kind of slow everything down, to kind of give the Justice League instructions on what best way to kind of go forward. And then, you know, the virus overtakes him, he attacks Alfred, and that panel where Alfred, you know, holds up the shotgun to him and says, "I'm sorry, son," before blowing him away. I swear to God, like I know they're kind of playing the heartstrings there, but that got me, I have to be honest. And then, you know, in the next issue, then he's there, and you can see all of them kind of laid out. You can see Bruce and Tim and Dick Grayson and stuff all laid out. Heartbreaking stuff. And then they take out another big hitter, another big death, Rob. Green Lantern. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something Tom said though as well, just about like hyper competent Batman. I also appreciated that about this story, because it would have been so easy for them to just do another story where Superman becomes a zombie and Batman's got to stop him because he's the biggest badass in the world and he's everybody's best friend and he always knows what to do. And I also love the JLA run. But that's where that trope started, and it worked really, really well in that run, but they've done it to death since then. It's like Batman is always better and he's always one step ahead of all the other superheroes, and we have to show that Batman's the best because he doesn't have any powers. And I'm just so tired of that now, and it's like I've kind of come back around the other side now where I'm like, no, let Superman be the guy that, you know, inspires everyone else. And I feel like that this story does that well, while still giving Superman, you know, a realistic challenge that exposes his kind of human frailties, you know. And I really like the parts of the story where we see Superman reluctant to kill zombies. Like, he doesn't even want to kill zombies, and he has to remind himself. There's a lovely moment where he's like, I have to, you know, park the fact that these are familiar faces, which is something that you never really hear characters say in a zombie movie. It's like, you know, they're not your friend, and you have to just divorce yourself from the fact that they look like your friend, you know. So I really, really like that.
Very Star Trek First Contact.
Yeah. Oh God. Stay tuned to the Patreon.
Stay tuned. There's an epic Star Trek episode coming.
If you have to kill them, you'll be doing them a favor. Yeah, Green Lantern's death. Yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit, but I like what happens off the back of it. That Dinah Lance becomes a Green Lantern, and I feel like that's a realistic enough choice. I'm not really sure the power ring picks a successor that quickly, but I'll go with it.
I thought it was a bit convenient, all right, I have to be honest. And we get this, and if I pass over anything or I miss anything that you want to talk about, guys, just bring it up. But we're in Metropolis then, and Lois and Superman basically make a headquarters out of the Daily Planet. Superman removes all the zombies, and they make a headquarters there in order to kind of contact the rest of the world through analog communication and stuff. We get another kind of big death, I suppose, then when Superman returns to Smallville, Tom, to check on his parents, on Martha and Jonathan Kent. And again, it actually did remind me a little bit of Shaun of the Dead with the Bill Nye character in Shaun of the Dead, where Jonathan has turned.
Sorry, Phil.
I thought that was handled quite nicely as well, though. Again, Superman just kind of locks him in the basement. He's in the basement already, and Superman just kind of locks him in the basement. As Jonathan Kent, death guy, I know we see Jonathan Kent die every second Wednesday, but I'm just wondering how you felt about that one.
I think I probably I would have liked to have seen him get infected. I think that might have had a bit more pathos to me to kind of see the journey, rather than him just turning up and being
already been done.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, like you say, Jonathan Kent's dead every other iteration. So it was nothing new, but yeah, a little bit more to that maybe for me.
Anything, say, Rob, in terms of the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy relationship? We kind of get this kind of anti-hero situation. I assumed at the very beginning when they're having the discussion and Harley Quinn is talking to Poison Ivy, and they're obviously in a relationship, and she's going to confront the Joker. I assume she knew that he was a zombie at this point, but reading on, I don't think she actually did. Before she, when he's chasing her down the road, and that the Harley Ivy relationship, where do you stand on that in general? Because it's not something I know it's hinted at in certain things that I've seen and I've read, but I've never seen it kind of fully realized to this extent. Where do you stand with that?
I mean, it was interesting in the animated series, which I think it all stems from. Like, Harley Quinn literally is from the animated series. I gotta admit, I'm not really the biggest Harley Quinn fan, at least not what she has become in the comics and everything since then. I feel like she's kind of a Deadpool a little bit, or like a Venom, where she sort of started out as a villain and then she became a little bit more of like a kind of a complicated anti-hero, and now she's basically just a superhero, and it's like they don't really know what to do with her because she's so popular that she can't remain a villain, and it's just kind of a mess. But they've an interesting relationship, and I do think it's fun the way they use Poison Ivy in this. Like, she grows this huge kind of jungle across the city, and like she is the kind of ally you would want in a zombie invasion, and I appreciate that about the story. We were talking about relationships that can be read into as potentially, homosexual relationships and all that kind of stuff. I'm perfectly fine if people want to read that into Poison Ivy and Harley, and that they may have been getting at that in the anime. I don't know. But like, I think it works just as easily if they're just, feminist allies, and Poison Ivy is trying to take Harley out of this kind of toxic relationship that she's in, which this obviously quite literally opens on Poison Ivy egging Harley on to confront the Joker, to finally break up with him. That's the impetus for her confronting the Joker in this. But yeah, like I'm fine with it. It's not gonna. It's nothing to write home about,
One thing that I really like about the book is that they kind of tease you with hope as the issues go on. You think that there's certain routes or certain avenues that they're pursuing that is going to result in a victory, be it a small victory rather than a large victory or whatever, but just kind of that they're kind of figuring out a plan and they're kind of getting things together, and then every few pages everything just falls to shit again, which is very similar to a lot of the zombie movies that I've seen, where you have a plan, you're going to get to whatever place or whatever army base, and then you get out there and it's ravaged by zombies or whatever.
It's very Walking Dead, actually, specifically the comics, which is my only interaction with that franchise. Like, they'd set up this whole new status quo. It's like, oh, look at this cool new base we're in, and we've all these resources available to us, and this cool new character is going to do this and all this kind of stuff, and then just everybody dies in the next issue and they have to move on to something else. It felt a lot like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And a prime example of it is, they just clear out the Daily Planet. They just Superman removes all the zombies. He gets the globe. He plugs the big hole in the side of it. They kind of get their message out or whatever. And next thing we have the situation where Ray Palmer is infected. He attacks the Atom from inside. The Atom? No, sorry. The Atom?
No, see, I had this problem reading it as well. And I'm sure you guys did too. You have Ray Palmer, who is the Atom. And he's attacking Captain Atom, a different character, from the inside. And I was reading it going, hang on a second, wait, is Ray Palmer not? And then it took me a couple of minutes to realize, oh yeah, they're two different characters with very similar names. Did you guys have that?
Yeah. I just had it there 2 seconds ago because I was like, I had it in my notes that obviously Ray Palmer is the Atom, and then when just thinking about it, I was like, what is that other guy's name? And then maybe I made him 100%. But like the prime example I have is when Captain Atom is basically going nuclear. I think the issue is actually called the nuclear option. He's basically going nuclear. He's going to blow up. Superman and Wonder Woman rush, and they kind of, like they do in so many other things, like, whenever there's a bomb or anything, like even in the Christopher Reeve movies, you grab the elevator, you get it up into space, but it doesn't quite work this time, and they still lose like 3 major US cities as a result of the explosion. And again, it's just another, they sink to another level of despair then going into the next issue. I really like that because so often there's these quick saves, these quick triumphs, these quick kind of, they figure it out because it's getting to the end of the episode or it's getting to the end of the issue, and every time they do anything here, it doesn't go their way, and I just really like that about it. Can we talk a little bit about, I was a bit confused reading it because when I did my research into it, obviously when I looked into it, it's a 6-issue book. But when I downloaded the digital version, there seemed to be 7 issues because what I found out is that the middle is a one-shot. There's a kind of a one-shot included, and that's the whole story arc about Big Barda and John Constantine and these kind of, B, C, D level kind of heroes. What they're doing in the background as all this stuff is going on with Superman and Batman and everybody else, Green Lantern and whatnot. What did you think of that story, Tom? Did you like that? Or
I'm a bit of a sucker for John Constantine, to be honest. A bit of a hometown hero,
I had a feeling you might be.
But I get it really, because there's this whole magical aspect to the DC universe, like kind of tucked away, out of the way, that you don't really see a lot of the time. But someone like, Captain Atom, incredibly powerful. What can he do in this situation? Not much, So I get it, looking for the alternative. Can't you just magic this thing away, And obviously John Constantine is like, no. If I could have done that, I would have done it already.
Yeah, he basically tells him to fuck off and leave him alone. He's going to go to some pocket universe and just drink himself into oblivion. That's his plan.
That's it. So I've always been I wasn't a big Hellblazer reader, but I probably read him most in Sandman. But I've always liked the character, so I thought it was pretty cool to just go down that little avenue, because at least then you could say, well, they tried it, but it just didn't work.
I don't think I've ever spoken to you, Rob, about, say, kind of that dark Justice League element of the DC universe and characters like John Constantine. Where do you stand on characters like that, like John?
Well, I'm really we're hitting all the things that I'm ignorant on tonight. I'm very, very ignorant on all that side of things. I have seen the episodes of the CW crossovers where he pops up in, and I think I saw most of the Keanu Reeves movie like years and years ago.
Oh, I saw
Actually,
it in cinema.
I tell a lie. I have definitely read like at least one issue of Hellblazer, but yeah, no, I'm fairly ignorant to all that side of all that side of things as well.
Well, someone I know you're a big fan of who does appear in this one shot is Booster Gold, and
oh, great.
They have the plan where John Constantine is basically tells them they're told that there's two options really to sort this all out. One is magic. John Constantine shuts that down. The other is time travel. So they race to Booster Gold's time machine in an attempt to travel back in time to stop the outbreak. And again, you're to kind of build this up, and you're like, okay, this is the plan. This is where the book is going to take off now. This is where they're going to go back in time, and they're going to kind of figure out what's going on, and this is going to be where the direction this travels in. But then they're stopped by, I wanted to guess what it is. He's what do they call him? A master of time. When they get into the time machine, there's a master of time waiting at the time machine, and basically says, no, it's not happening, guys. This is the way it's meant to be. This is the way it's meant to go. There's this massive big fight. Everybody is killed. And then John Constantine is kind of left there at the end to kind of figure out what he's going to do next, and meets up with Dr. Fate. It doesn't really go anywhere. When Booster Gold and everybody is killed, Dr. Fate and Zatanna and stuff appear, and they basically tell John Constantine that they're going to team up with him and kind of figure all this out. Now, we don't get a conclusion really to that, but after the 6 issues and the one shot, obviously DCeased kind of expands then into an ongoing universe, really, where you get loads of follow-up. So I honestly, I'm ignorant of whether that is followed up later on. I assume it is, but write in and let us know.
I'm going to be honest. I didn't read this thing you're talking about because I read the single issues on the DC Universe app. So I'm delighted that you guys got this extra issue that I didn't read.
I didn't realize that we got this extra. It wasn't until I was doing up my notes at the end, and I was going through them to get the episode. I was going through the issues to get the episode titles, to get the issue titles, and there was 7. And I was like, well, that's not right. And I went back, and I couldn't figure out what the hell this was until I realized that what was the de facto kind of 5th issue is this one shot. But it's one of my favorites, I have to say. Like, I really thought that it was a really good kind of side quest, basically, with all these kind of C-list heroes and stuff.
Did I hear you say that Wave Rider was the character they meet, Tom?
Yeah, that's right. Wasn't he from 0 Hour or something? He originated.
He was a big character in 0 Hour, and he pops up in not Death of Superman, but Funeral for a Friend / World Without a Superman. He appears in that when they're kind of grappling over Superman's whether or not he's actually dead and all that kind of stuff. And he's a really fun character, actually. The
team, Rob, basically is these characters. You've got Big Barda, you've got Mr. Miracle, you've got Mr. Terrific, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, and then John Constantine, and then at the end you have Dr. Fate and Zatanna kind of turn up. So that's
the interesting thing, though, is that in some weird kind of headache-inducing Back to the Future kind of way, Booster Gold disappears because the future isn't there anymore because of what's happened. So he disappears, and it's like, that stuff always gives me a bit of headache.
Was he holding the sports almanac at the time? Or?
I actually have a sports almanac here beside me. Yeah, but it's a poignant moment where with Blue Beetle as well, where he realizes what's going on, and Blue Beetle is like, "Stay here, man, stay." And Booster Gold says, he just says, "I'm sorry, I'll never know you now," and he just disappears into oblivion. And it's poignant. One of your favorite characters, Rob, I just want to get your take on this version of Lex Luthor, power-suited Lex Luthor, who teams up with the Justice League somewhat.
Yeah, actually really, really like that. And to go back to a point you were making earlier on about, that they set up a status quo and then immediately just like shift away from it and everybody dies. I really liked the way Tom Taylor was writing Lex Luthor, and there's a bit where he's talking to Cyborg and he's like, "Wow, like this is amazing what you've done. How come we've never worked together before?" And he's like, "Oh well, you kept trying to kill me and my friends." And he's like, "Sure, but in my defense, that was before I realized you could be useful." That's just a great like Lex Luthor back and forth. The dialogue in this can be a little bit kind of like MCU,
a bit Joss Whedon-y, I've noted it as.
Joss Whedon-y, yeah. There's a couple of kind of like zinger moments that I was kind of like, ugh, but like the Lex Luthor stuff I thought really, really landed. And then, there's a bit then, there's a lovely bit, a page later where they're arguing with Superman. It's like, "Oh, we need to evacuate the planet." And Superman is like, "No, we need to stay here and we need to save the planet." And it's obviously, really poignant and ironic and all that. And Lex is like, "Oh, losing two homeworlds in one lifetime. How careless." And Lois punches him in the face. It's a great moment.
In a big splash page, it's great.
You could argue the interpretation. I kind of feel like he would have retaliated a bit. Maybe it's just me, but yeah, no, I thought that was a great scene, and I was like, oh wow, I want to live in this world where he's kind of interacting with these characters, and then he dies a page later.
Attacked by Martian Manhunter. Yeah, so then eventually the Flash becomes corrupted as well by the virus, and he just starts infecting people at lightning fast speed around the world. Superman flies through him at super speed. He flies around the other side of the world because he can't catch up with him. He meets him at the other side. But Superman ends up getting infected. As a Zack Snyder fan, Tom, death to Superman, all that kind of stuff. How do you think they handled the fall of the Man of Steel in DCeased?
It was a great moment, gruesome as it was, just the two of them collide, and it's just a Flash getting obliterated kind of thing. I think Supes maybe could have just, give him a slap or something about the head, and that would have been enough. He didn't need to, and then he maybe would have been okay. I know our mutual friend, Zach Moore, isn't a big fan of the evil Superman trope, and here we have it again, I suppose. The thing is, and I'm not getting ahead of ourselves, but they continue this on, and you wonder who's actually left, who's actually left for these sequel books. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you get kind of, you get the obligatory, where Clark says goodbye. He realizes he can kind of hold it off a little bit longer than most. He says goodbye to Martha, thanks her for taking them in, says goodbye to Lois, and has a chat with John where he basically tells John that it's his responsibility now to kind of take up the mantle. And we also have the mirror of that with Damian Wayne as well. Alfred provides him with Batman's suit and says, your father was very proud of you. He thought you were ready for this. And from that moment on, we have Damian Wayne wearing the bat suit. I think Harley even refers to him as Batboy at one point or something like that. Superman goes apeshit, starts taking out buildings and stuff. And while this is all going on, the plan at this point, as you kind of brought up there, Rob, is just the abandoning ship of Earth. Really, they've set up two refuges, one in Gotham City, where Ivy's kind of providing protection with her plant life and stuff. She's kind of joined the team. And then the other one is, where's the other one?
Paradise Island, is it?
Paradise Island, yeah. They increase the landmass of Paradise Island, the Amazonians do, and allow kind of refugees to come there. And they build two big arcs. And the arcs are put under threat then because Superman is on the loose. How does it end? It ends with the Justice League turning up at the last minute. Just as Superman's kind of about to attack the arc, or Superman flies into the sun. They're worried that he's going to blow up the arcs, and he goes into the sun to basically turn the sun supernova as the arcs are escaping to leave the Earth behind. Rob, how do you think they tied it up at the end? Do you think it was well done?
Yeah, I thought it was poignant enough. Like to go back to something Tom was saying about evil Superman there, I think. I've kind of gone on a weird full circle with all this stuff where I think that there was a period there for so long where it felt like that was the only thing that people really, really gravitated towards was evil Superman. Like I mentioned it, actually, I funnily enough mentioned it in our previous Halloween episode, Brightburn, that it felt like there was a period of around 3 or 4 years there where it was like, The Boys, Brightburn, and then the DCEU was leaning towards something that was probably heading in that direction. And then you have books like this, and I was like, oh, it just feels like a bit of a bummer when this is the only thing that seems to be really capturing the public's interest. But now, I don't know, is it just that we have the new movie, but also the comics have really veered more in a traditional direction, for want of a better word. I'm able to look at stuff like this and just kind of appreciate them for what they are and really examine them and try and think about what the writer's intention was. And I think Tom Taylor really built up a quality version of Superman in this world so that I can really kind of get behind it then when he pivots gears. So I don't have a huge issue with evil Superman. And I like the space arc idea. And like every time that comes up in versions of the origin, Jor-El saying, "Oh, well, I could build a fleet of space arcs." I'm kind of like, yeah, I'd kind of like to see that. To be honest, I'd like to see that story where they migrate out into the stars and they colonize a new world or something like that. So it's fun to think about. So I don't mind it.
I think the thing is it's not the point of the story, is it? And it has such a build up that Superman is around doing Superman stuff most of the way through it, that when it happens, it's like it does have a tragedy to it.
Yes.
which I think they play quite well. So it's not just like, here's evil Superman again, guys.
Yeah,
so,
it doesn't feel exploitative, which I think it kind of did in the Snyderverse. I'm not going to lie, and also, previous friend of the show, Dan Jurgens, this is the classic Dan Jurgens version of John Kent in this story. And it's great to see. It's great to see him back. It had been a while since I'd read a story with, John Kent as a little boy. And he's lovely in this. And we end the story with him, inspired. And he's probably going to go on to become the new Superman. You mentioned as well, Alan, that Damian becomes the new Batman. That could have been handled so badly. And we've read stories similar to that in even in previous episodes when we did Rise of the Super 7, where I think Con-El becomes Superman or something, and it's really tacky and it's kind of just thrown together. Whereas in this, it feels earned, like all the kind of legacy characters rising to the occasion. Like it feels right and it feels like well written and stuff like that. So I thought that was good.
I have to say, I know you mentioned earlier on, Rob, about the zingers, but I laughed out loud with the Oliver Queen one there in one of the final issues, where it turns out that Batman had kind of left a plan to take down all the major players in the Justice League, all the world enders as such. And Oliver Queen takes it to heart that there was nothing there for him. He was like, I could end the world, and everybody's like, yeah, sure you could. And there's a moment where a zombified Aquaman, Arthur Curry, arrives on a Kraken, and he's going to take out Themyscira, and Oliver Queen shoots him through the eye with an arrow. And I just found it so funny. He says, and Batman didn't think I could be dangerous. Just fired an arrow half a mile through raging winds into the brain of the undead king of the sea while he was controlling the damn Kraken. Fuck you, Batman. I loved that.
It feels kind of uncool to even like say a nice thing about James Gunn right now, but I'm really excited to see what the new DCU version of Green Arrow is, because I really want that Green Arrow. I feel like we had the CW version for so long, who was kind of just diet Batman. I really want to get back to like sass talking left wing hippie Green Arrow. I really want to see that in a movie.
And you're right, Rob. Like, it ends with this kind of optimistic note where John is taken with the mantle and they're on the Ark and they're traveling. They find a new world that they're traveling towards. But again, just before that, there's this thing where they set up this ray of hope and just dash at last minute in the conversation between Wonder Woman, which is beautifully drawn as well and coloured and everything. I love it. With Wonder Woman and Cyborg, where Cyborg's left on the planet, he's decided to stay behind because he's apocalyptic in technology and all that kind of stuff. And he asks her, he ties she's zombified at this point, and he wraps her in the lasso of truth, and he asks her directly, he goes, is there a way to solve this? Is there a cure to all this? And she explains that he's the cure. And when she explains it to him, he turns around, he looks up at the sky, and it's kind of this hopeful moment where he's like, I have to get to them, I have to tell them on the Ark. And then she just comes up and breaks his neck and kills him. And again, you're like, oh my God, like this is it's bleak, but in a way that I thoroughly enjoyed. What did you think of that little interaction, Tom?
I think you're absolutely right. The bleakness of it, and that is zombie movies through and through,
Yeah.
It's the long game, it's the slow death, it's just when you think you've got a bit of hope, it's dashed. And I think this has that absolutely in spades. Didn't she pull his head off? I think she pulled his whole head off, didn't she?
Yeah, she did, yeah.
So
brutal. Fatality.
Yeah. So I think much as it's a DC thing, he's channeling some of those zombie tropes as well, which I think was pretty well done.
Is it something, I'll throw this out to both of you guys, is it something, having read now, say, the 6 issues or the 6 issues in the one shot, Tom, is it a story that you'd be interested in kind of following on, or is that enough? It's kind of more the same.
Batman and Superman are dead. I don't know, man. Just to follow on from that point Tom was making, it is such a zombie trope, and it reminded me of, there's a lovely moment in the Night of the Living Dead remake where they're scrambling for like a whole bunch of that movie, trying to find the keys to a gas station so that they can open it up and put gas in the cars so that they can escape from this place they're in. And they spend so long looking for these keys to the gas station, and then near the end of the movie, spoiler warning, you get this really heartbreaking scene where Tony Todd is trapped in a room and the zombies have surrounded the room, and he finally finds the fucking keys to the gas station, and he just has this little laugh to himself as he realizes that like he's gonna die and there's nothing he can do about it, and it reminded me of that.
Perfect. Anybody else have anything they want to mention about it before we move on?
I'm not so much a modern day DC guy because I just don't read the books at the moment, you know. So the thought of a sequel where like all the people I like are dead now, it doesn't really hold that much pull for me, you know. I enjoyed this for what it was, you know, and that's absolutely fine. If the sequel was in front of me and I think there's like 3 or 4 of them now or something, you know, and I had the spare time, then, you know, sure, I'd read them. I'm not sure I will necessarily seek them out though, because, you know, just to go off on a bit of a tangent, it's like the best Justice League for me is those big hitters. And what happens is they'll start the book with them, then they'll bring other people in, some people will leave, and then the next minute the Justice League is like, you know, maybe Superman's still in there, but this guy's, you know, and it's just like I start to lose interest with that. And then the status quo is restored and then it goes again. So a world with all the kind of second stringers doesn't necessarily hold much interest for me, you know.
Just in terms of, say, your general DC fandom and your fandom of Superman in general, obviously this is a Superman podcast. Where do you stand with Superman as a character? Did you grow up with him? Did you watch was it the Christopher Reeve movies that introduced you? Was it the comic books? Was it Lois and Clark? What's your Superman journey been?
So the Christopher Reeve Superman movies are more important than Star Wars to me. You know, when I was a kid, Christopher Reeve, and I still hold him above any other super hero performance ever. You know, there's been some great ones. I'm not saying there haven't been, but he is absolutely so important to me. I was never a huge Superman comic reader. I was more of a Batman guy, and I generally am a bit more of a Batman guy, but there's just something about Superman that it is so, I suppose, not to be cheesy, but in my heart because of Christopher Reeve. And going on from there, you know, like I said, I like the Zack Snyder stuff. There's certainly conversations to be had about all of it. You know, I liked the James Gunn movie. I didn't think it was perfect. I think a lot of the criticisms I've heard of it are very valid, sort of thing. I have this strange thing where I don't really like Superman on television. And so I couldn't really watch Lois and Clark. I'm not really a fan of, who's the guy in the newer show that...
Oh, Tyler Hoechlin.
Yeah, you know, and the thing is, people who I respect, like yourselves, love that stuff. So I kind of recognize in myself that this is a bias that I have. So I don't really go out there saying those shows are crap or anything like that, because that's not the case at all. But I mean, that's life really. Some things speak to us more than others. So Superman in the movie world is my thing really. Not so much in the TV world, but you know, it all goes back to Christopher Reeve for me.
You kindly sent in your thoughts about the new Superman movie, and I omitted to include them in the listener feedback episode we did.
That's all right, man. It's yesterday's news now.
You're okay. Can you just kind of speak to that? What do you think of the new film?
You know, I liked it. Probably not as much as I hoped I would. And it's a kind of thing where when people say, like I just mentioned, if people have a criticism of it, I kind of go, yeah, you know what, I can see your point there, although it doesn't matter as much to me. I like the kind of silver aginess of it. It's obviously a very James Gunn movie, which turns some people off, but, you know, I like James Gunn, so it's no big deal to me. What I want going forward is we need to see Superman start to stand up and be a leader now. He's still kind of the farm boy in this movie, which is to its credit, because I think I think maybe Lois and Clark had a touch of that. I don't know. I never really watched it, but it's the first movie where it's like, yeah, this is a Superman who was raised on a farm. I don't even think the Reeve movie sort of brought that home as much as this one did. So I think that was good for this movie, but as long as there's an evolution going forward where he becomes that sort of stand-up kind of Superman who could lead a Justice League, then I'll be okay with that,
Yeah, I spoke on our recent Star Trek movie ranking episode that myself and Zach and Rob did, and I quoted the great Martin Lakin of Cape Wonder Europe, and he has kind of this philosophy of he said it on our episode before where he said we'll always have raiders. It doesn't matter how many Indiana Jones sequels come out or games or whatever, he'll always have those originals. And I think when I went to see Superman this year, I was really hoping that it was going to be my Superman again, and I kind of put so much pressure not only on the film but on myself to enjoy it, and I was so crushed afterwards immediately that I was like, oh, it's not what I wanted it to be. And then I watched it again and I liked it more, and I've watched it 2 or 3 times since, and I've liked it more each time. And I think I'm just in a place now where, like that, I have the Christopher Reeve movies, I have Lois and Clark, they'll always be my Superman. But now I'm interested to see where this character goes, be it for me or any. I'm thrilled that other people are loving it so much, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're going to get more sequels, and hopefully the world expands and all that. But I'm not going to take. I'm hoping that when the next one comes out in 2027, I'm not going to take it as personally. I'm just going to go in with a bucket of popcorn and hope I get a good Superman movie. And if I don't, I don't. And I think it's a healthier mental health space to be in than I was maybe going into this one this year.
I think the thing is, as well, as fans of anything really, especially as well schooled as we are in this stuff, when you go to something and it's not the complete experience, it can feel a bit hollow and empty sometimes. It's like, well, I went to see that James Bond movie and he didn't say Bond, James Bond, and he didn't, do this and he didn't do that. But and I think the gripe of Superman getting the crap kicked out of him throughout the whole movie basically was, I said in that feedback, for me, it's like, well, zoom out, this is the first time he's truly been challenged, and it's Lex Luthor who orchestrated it. So again, it's zoom out. The next movie, I hope it's not the case. I hope he's a bit more of the complete Superman sort of thing. But I kind of like movies where people aren't the finished article yet, or there's, if it was in a comic book where he got beat up a lot all the way through it, people probably wouldn't be as bothered. But I think with movies, we're a bit like, well, if it's not the complete Superman experience, then it's bad. It's like we didn't see the supporting characters enough. And that is certainly true. But in the next movie, if they're there and they're a part of it, then great. It's just not what happened in this story. So I'm pretty cool with all that. I'm pretty relaxed. I just kind of see, as long as it keeps evolving and we get a bit more of this or a bit more of that next time, I'm okay with it.
I'm going to put you both on the spot. I'm going to start with you, Rob. Rob, for listeners who want to check out some high-quality zombie entertainment, give me 3 zombie recommendation movie-wise that you'd think people should check out.
Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble for not mentioning one that is the one that everyone says is the best, but I'm going to say Night of the Living Dead, either version, Day of the Dead, and Return of the Living Dead. Those are my 3 favorite zombie movies. And yeah, Dawn of the Dead is the best one, the same way that like The Dark Knight is, technically, objectively the best Batman movie, but it's not my favorite, blah, blah, blah. It's the same situation. Those ones are my favorites, so check those ones out.
Tom, do you agree? Do you have any other ones?
Wow, okay. This is going to be tough. Well, I'll say the original Dawn of the Dead because I think it's a romp. I think it's a good time, and a lot of people love that the most, so that for sure. Obviously, Shaun of the Dead. I feel like I need to say something a bit less obvious, so I'm going to go with something that I think has been pretty much forgotten. So if anyone can find it, then go for it. But there was about 20 years ago now, there was a movie called Colin, and it was shot on like a shoestring budget, and it was about like just this kid who becomes a zombie. and he sort of shuffles his way through the whole movie. And it's one of the only zombie movies where I've seen that really has the tragedy of these are dead people, It's not just a monster. This is a person who was once alive. So if anyone can find that, I remember it being pretty good. If it's not, and my memory's bad on it, then I do apologize. So yeah, there you go.
I'm surprised, actually, in hindsight, that nobody mentioned 28 Days Later or Zombieland. I really enjoy Zombieland.
Zombieland's good too, yeah.
Tom, it's been a pleasure. Sir, where can people find you if they want to check out more of your content?
So I guess the TwilightZonePodcast.com. I'm not a huge social media guy these days. So if you go there, you can see the latest episodes of the podcast. And it's there. But, I just want to thank you guys, because I think, like I said at the beginning of the show, it's one of my go-to, day one listens. And the guests you have had on this podcast are unbelievable. And I think it's a real testament to, if you put your heads together and you have a real love for something, that amazing things can happen. And your show is proof of that. So thank you for inviting me onto it.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure, really, honestly. And to be honest, that fills me with so much joy, because I'm legitimately such a huge fan of your stuff. I really am, and thank you so much. Rob, is there anything you'd like to add before we go?
No, just that Tom can enjoy a brand new subscriber. I can't wait to listen. I can't wait to jump on board the Twilight Zone, and it's been great listening to you guys talk about this thing that you're so passionate about. And yeah, that's my Halloween sorted.
Excellent. So, folks, the crisis is over. Or perhaps it never truly ends. In the pages of DCeased, the world burned, heroes fell, and yet somehow hope found a heartbeat. It limped, it gasped, but it lived just long enough to remind us why we ever believed in capes and courage in the first place. Tonight we've walked through an apocalypse of imagination where gods bled, monsters mourned, and even the undead longed to be human again. But if you've learned anything from our journey, dear listener, it's that even in a universe consumed by darkness, the light of a hero can flicker and still refuse to die. I'd like to thank our guide through this shadowed realm, Tom Elliott, a man who knows that sometimes the scariest monsters don't come from space, they come from the mirror. And of course, Rob O'Connor, my partner in all things super and strange. And you, our listener, for stepping beyond the panels, beyond the comfort of the known, into a place where ink meets infinity. You may close the comic now, but remember, the end of the world is just another beginning in the Superfan zone.
Be sure to see the fun-filled family life of one of America's greatest entertainers, The Danny Thomas Show, Monday nights over most of these stations.